The Alaskan autumn of 1988 was a fleeting, beautiful lie. A brief splash of crimson and gold across the vast, unforgiving landscape before the long, dark grip of winter claimed Anchorage. For Sarah Jensen, 34, a receptionist at a downtown real estate office, this transition felt more profound than usual. Life had a way of mirroring the seasons in Alaska. Moments of bright hope often gave way to periods of chilling uncertainty. Sarah was a woman forged in the crucible of independence. She'd come to Alaska over a decade ago, drawn by the promise of opportunity and a fresh start, a common narrative in a state where rugged individualism was not just a philosophy, but a necessity. With her two children, Emily, 12, and Josh, 8, she carved out a life in a modest, two-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood off DeBar Road. Her days were a meticulously choreographed ballet of school runs, work deadlines, and evening hockey practices at the Dempsey Anderson Arena, followed by hearty homemade dinners, often her famous pot roast, a staple against the encroaching cold. Emily, with her mother's strong will and inquisitive eyes, was navigating the turbulent waters of pre-adolescence, while Josh, a boisterous, freckled boy, still found joy in the simplest things, like building snow forts in the backyard when the first flakes began to fall. Sarah adored them, her entire world revolving around their laughter and their needs. She had endured a difficult divorce years prior, and while the wounds had healed, a cautious pragmatism now guided her heart. For the past 2 years, Mark Thornton had been a steady presence in their lives. A burly, good-natured construction worker with calloused hands and a comforting laugh, Mark fit seamlessly into the Jensen household. He was kind to the children, always ready to fix a leaky faucet or chase away a nightmare. Sarah appreciated his stability, his easy humor, and the way he'd light a fire in the hearth on a chilly evening. He was the anchor she hadn't realized she needed, a safe harbor against the rough seas of single parenthood. They'd spent summer weekends fishing on the Kenai River, their old Dodge pickup rattling along the scenic Seward Highway, and autumn evenings curled up by the fire, planning a future that felt, for the first time in a long time, secure. But as October deepened, a subtle shift began to ripple through Sarah's usually resilient demeanor. A faint shadow seemed to cling to her, dimming the light in her hazel eyes. She became withdrawn, often lost in thought, her usual effervescence replaced by a quiet preoccupation. Emily noticed it first, the way her mother would sometimes stare out the window, a faraway look clouding her face, or how she'd end phone calls abruptly, her voice hushed, her gaze darting to ensure no one was listening. "Mom, are you okay?" Emily had asked one evening, finding Sarah sitting alone in the dim kitchen, a half-finished cup of tea growing cold. Sarah had offered a strained smile. "Just tired, sweetie, long day at the office." But Emily knew better. Her mother, despite her exhaustion, had always possessed an unyielding energy, a spark that now seemed muted. Mark, too, sensed the change. He attributed it to the stress of bills, the approaching holidays, the general weariness of life. Yet there were moments, fleeting but sharp, that pricked at his unease. Sarah would receive phone calls late at night, whispering into the receiver in the hallway, her back turned, her voice tight with an emotion he couldn't decipher. Once he'd overheard her say, "It's over, I told you, leave us alone." When he asked who it was, she'd simply brushed it off as a wrong number, her eyes refusing to meet his. Another time, she'd abruptly changed their route home from the grocery store, mumbling something about avoiding traffic, but he'd caught a glimpse of a dark, unfamiliar sedan parked suspiciously near their street, its windows tinted. A chill, unrelated to the weather, had snaked up his spine. The air in the house grew heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. Sarah started keeping her purse close, even inside the house, and developed a habit of checking the locks multiple times before bed. She spoke vaguely of old troubles resurfacing, dismissing Mark's attempts to pry for details with a terse, "It's nothing, just a ghost from the past I thought I'd buried." But the ghost, whatever it was, seemed to be haunting her present. Then came October 26, 1988, a Wednesday. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of snow. Sarah had worked late, closing a complex deal at the office. She arrived home, weary but relieved, just in time to help Emily with her algebra, and read Josh a bedtime story about a brave Alaskan sled dog. Mark was out, working an evening shift on a construction project near Eagle River. Around 10:30 p.m., after both children were fast asleep, Sarah realized they were out of milk, a trivial errand but essential for the morning cereal. She scribbled a note for Mark, telling him she'd gone to the 24-hour Cars grocery store on Northern Lights Boulevard and would be back shortly. She pulled on her thick, red wool jacket, grabbed her keys and purse, and stepped out into the biting Alaskan night. Her pale blue 1980 Chevy Nova, a reliable but unassuming vehicle, started with a familiar cough and hum. She backed out of the driveway, her headlights cutting through the pre-winter darkness, and vanished into the night. The next morning, Josh awoke first, his stomach rumbling for cereal. He found Emily already in the kitchen, staring at the untouched note on the counter. The milk carton was still empty. Mark had returned late, finding Sarah's note, but assuming she'd simply gone to a friend's house after an argument he didn't remember having. He'd gone to bed tired, expecting her to be back by morning. But morning came, and the house remained eerily silent, save for the children's hushed voices. A knot of dread tightened in Mark's stomach. He called Sarah's office, then her friend's, his voice growing more frantic with each unanswered ring. By noon, the sickening realization had fully dawned. Sarah Jensen was gone. He called the Anchorage Police Department, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Detective Robert Miller, a seasoned officer with the APD, took the call. Miller had seen his share of missing persons cases in Anchorage, a city that, despite its urban facade, was bordered by an immense, untamed wilderness capable of swallowing anything whole. He arrived at the Jensen home, a man of quiet authority, his eyes missing nothing. The house was orderly, no signs of forced entry, no struggle. Emily and Josh, bewildered and frightened, sat huddled on the sofa, their innocence shattered. Mark, pale and shaken, recounted the events of the previous night, downplaying any tensions, eager to portray a picture of domestic harmony. Miller noted the slight hesitation in his voice, a flicker of something he couldn't quite place. He interviewed neighbors who offered little beyond observations of Sarah as a good mother and a friendly face. No one had seen anything unusual. Her Chevy Nova was also missing. The initial investigation was a flurry of activity. APD officers canvassed the neighborhood, their flashlights cutting through the deepening gloom of late October. Posters with Sarah's smiling face, a picture taken during a summer picnic, appeared on lampposts and storefronts across Anchorage. The local news channels carried stories, her disappearance a stark contrast to the usual reports of moose sightings and oil prices. Police focused on two possibilities: Sarah had left voluntarily, or she had met with foul play. Given the lack of forced entry and the missing car, the voluntary departure theory initially gained traction among some investigators. They theorized she might have been fleeing old troubles, as Mark vaguely recalled her mentioning. Mark vehemently rejected this, insisting Sarah would never abandon her children. Emily, with tears streaming down her face, echoed his sentiment: "My mom would never leave us." Never. Searches were organized, sprawling outwards from the Jensen home. Volunteers, braving the crisp Alaskan air, combed the wooded areas around the city, the desolate stretches along the Glen Highway, and the winding trails through the Chugach Mountains. The vastness of the landscape was daunting, a cruel irony that the same natural beauty that drew so many to Alaska could also so effectively conceal a secret. The treacherous tides of Turnagain Arm were scoured, its icy, silty waters notoriously unforgiving. But the searches yielded nothing. No car, no personal effects, no trace of Sarah. As the days bled into weeks, the temperature plummeted and the first significant snowfalls blanketed Anchorage. The ground froze solid, sealing away any potential forensic evidence. The active investigation slowed, then stalled. The leads dried up. The initial media frenzy faded, replaced by other, more immediate headlines. Sarah Jensen's case, like so many others, began its slow, painful descent into the abyss of cold cases. Detective Miller, a dedicated man, kept the file open, reviewing it periodically, but without new information, there was little to do but wait. The impact on Emily and Josh was profound and irreparable. Mark, struggling with his own grief and the unspoken suspicions that lingered around him, found himself unable to care for the children amidst the raw emotional wreckage. Sarah's sister, Aunt Carol, a kind and practical woman from Fairbanks, drove down the park's highway, her heart heavy, to take the children into her care. They moved north, leaving behind their home, their school, and the lingering ghost of their mother's last known movements. Emily grew up haunted by the question marks of her past, a quiet, watchful girl who carried a burden far beyond her years. Josh, initially outgoing, became withdrawn, his childhood joy replaced by a deep-seated sadness and a pervasive sense of abandonment, despite Carol's loving efforts. Mark, isolated and consumed by guilt and sorrow, eventually moved away from Anchorage, unable to bear the weight of the city's unspoken judgment. 15 years later, the year is 2003. Anchorage has grown, subtly transformed, but the core spirit of the last frontier remains. Emily is now 27, working as a teacher in a small village outside Wasilla, still carrying the invisible scars of her mother's disappearance. Josh, 23, joined the military, seeking a sense of order and purpose in a world that had once seemed so chaotic. Detective Miller had long since retired, his old cases passed on to a new generation of investigators. One such detective was Sarah Chen, a sharp, tenacious officer who had a reputation for reopening seemingly hopeless cold cases. The Alaskan spring of 2003 arrived with its usual promise of renewal, but this year it brought something more. Deep within the Chugach Mountains, accessible only by a little-used, unmaintained logging road that snaked around the remote, pristine expanse of Eklatna Lake, a survey crew was conducting preliminary work for a new utility line project. The ground, still thawing from a particularly severe winter, was soft and yielding in places, saturated by the spring melt. It was during a routine ground scan that their equipment picked up an anomaly, a large metallic object buried beneath a thick layer of boggy soil and tangled undergrowth in a secluded inlet, far off the main track. Thinking it might be old mining equipment or discarded machinery, the crew began to excavate. What they uncovered sent a shiver down their spines. Partially submerged in the muck, corroded and encrusted with years of sediment and plant matter, was the unmistakable shape of a car. A pale blue 1980 Chevy Nova. The discovery immediately triggered a call to the Alaska State Troopers, who in turn contacted the Anchorage Police Department. Detective Chen, recognizing the make, model, and year, felt a jolt of ice water race through her veins. It could be a match. It had to be. The recovery operation was painstaking. The remote location, the challenging terrain, and the need for meticulous preservation of potential evidence meant days of careful work. Finally, the rusted, mud-caked vehicle was carefully extracted from its watery grave and transported to a secure forensic facility. What was found inside confirmed their deepest fears and reignited a 15-year-old nightmare. Decomposed human remains, identifiable through dental records, were indeed those of Sarah Jensen. But the car held more than just a body, it held secrets. Among the detritus of years of decay, near the driver's side floorboard, a small, silver-toned locket was carefully retrieved. It was personalized, intricately engraved with the initials CM and a delicate floral pattern. It wasn't Sarah's. This tiny, forgotten piece of jewelry was a crucial, unexpected lead. Furthermore, a section of the car's broken antenna, found wedged beneath the seat, bore traces of human skin and blood, preserved remarkably well by the cold, anaerobic environment. Forensic analysis quickly revealed a DNA profile. Detective Chen, armed with this new, tangible evidence, revisited the original case files. The locket's initials, CM, and the DNA profile became her focus. She cross-referenced names, old contacts, and the vague, old troubles Sarah had mentioned. It led her to a woman named Clara Miller. Clara had been an on-again, off-again acquaintance of Mark Thornton years before Sarah. She had a history of volatile relationships and a minor criminal record involving domestic disturbances in the lower 48 before she moved to Alaska, a past that had never been fully explored by the original investigation. More chillingly, the DNA from the antenna matched Mark Thornton. Chen brought Mark in for questioning. He was older now, his face lined with years of unspoken grief, but his eyes still held a haunted quality. Confronted with the locket and the DNA evidence, the carefully constructed facade he had maintained for a decade and a half began to crumble. The truth, when it finally spilled out, was a devastating testament to human weakness, fear, and a desperate act of concealment. Mark confessed Sarah had discovered his secret affair with Clara. On that fateful night, after dropping off the milk note, Sarah had gone to confront Clara at her small cabin, hidden away in a more remote area of Anchorage, not the grocery store. The confrontation had escalated rapidly. Clara, fueled by anger and a history of impulsive violence, had struck Sarah during a heated argument, a blow that proved fatal. Mark had arrived shortly after, drawn by Clara's panic call, only to find Sarah lifeless. In a moment of sheer panic, terrified of Clara's past catching up to her, and desperate to protect what little future he believed he had, Mark had made an unthinkable decision. He helped Clara dispose of Sarah's body and her car. Together, under the shroud of the Alaskan night, they drove Sarah's Nova to Eklatna Lake, down the unmaintained logging road, and sank it in the boggy inlet, hoping the vast, unforgiving wilderness would swallow their secret forever. Mark was arrested, charged as an accessory to murder and for obstruction of justice. Clara Miller, who had long since left Alaska, was tracked down in Arizona. Confronted with the undeniable evidence in Mark's confession, she too broke down, confessing to manslaughter. The news hit Emily and Josh like a tidal wave, 15 years after the initial tsunami. The closure they had yearned for was finally here, but it came at a brutal cost. Their mother hadn't abandoned them. She had been murdered, and the man who had helped raise them, the man they had trusted, had been complicit in her disappearance. The answers, once so desperately sought, brought a fresh wave of pain, a new kind of betrayal. The story of Sarah Jensen became a somber footnote in Alaskan history, a reminder of the secrets hidden beneath the veneer of daily life and the vast, beautiful wilderness that could so easily become a grave. It underscored the institutional failures, the lost clues, and the tragic consequences when human drama unravels into darkness. For Emily and Josh, the silence of their mother's disappearance was finally broken, but the echoes of what was uncovered would resonate for the rest of their lives, a chilling testament to the enduring power of truth, no matter how long it takes to surface, from the depths of Alaska's frozen heart.